You know how people say timing is everything, right? Well, timing definitely saved Harley-Davidson, and I mean quite literally saved it. Because if you rewind just 90 years ago, give or take, America's most iconic motorcycle brand was on the ropes on its last leg. Bankruptcies were piling up across the country, Indian Motorcycles was breathing down Harley's neck, and the Great Depression had slashed sales into a fraction of what they once were. And by the mid-1930s, Harley was close to flatlining. But here's where things get interesting. At the same time Harley's books were bleeding red, across the ocean, storm clouds of World War II were building. And tucked inside that chaos was an opportunity, one that would not only rescue Harley-Davidson from financial ruin, but it would cement its image as the American motorcycle. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. As you can see, new setup, new series. This is gonna be the first of my MotoHistory series where I kind of do a deep dive on a sliver of an iconic motorcycle or motorcycle brand's history and kind of talk about it. Today we're focusing on the one, the only Harley-Davidson and how it was saved by one of the worst things of all time, World War II. Just a little history on Harley-Davidson. Back in 1903, William Harley and the Davidson brothers put together what was essentially a bicycle with a motor strapped to it in a little Milwaukee workshop. This little thing ain't nothing much by today's standards, but back then it was making waves. By the 1910s, Harley-Davidson wasn't just making bikes. They were already the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. And these weren't toys either. Police departments were buying them, racers were tearing up dirt tracks, and soldiers in World War I were already testing them in the mud. By 1918, almost half of Harley's production was going straight to the US military. So Harley already had early ties in its career to the military. Not too long after that, the Great Depression came and smacked everyone right in the face. People didn't have money to be spending on motorcycles. They were worried about buying food and all the other necessities. Indian and Harley both suffered, which, if you didn't know, Indian is actually America's oldest motorcycle manufacturer. So Indian, already having a leg up on Harley in terms of history, is also struggling too in the Great Depression, of course. Indian had slightly more civilian appeal, while Harley was increasingly tied to police and government contracts. By the mid-1930s, Harley was barely hanging on. While Harley was struggling to stay alive, the rest of the world was spinning towards chaos. Nazi Germany was rearing, Japan was on the move in Asia. The US military knew that they might get dragged into another global war. One big question the army had was, how do we move troops fast across rough terrain? Essentially, the reason why they were even considering motorcycles is because trucks were just too big to get through like dense trees and whatnot. So troops were mainly on horseback. So the idea was to have something to replace the horses, essentially. Bikes were lightweight, fast, maneuverable, and Harley already knew this, and so did the military. They already had ties to begin with, like I said. Harley had already supplied 17,000 bikes in World War I. So by the late 1930s, when the army started sniffing around for a two-wheeled workhorse, Harley was right there raising its hand, first in line. But it wasn't just Harley. Indian Motorcycles wanted in too. Both companies submitted prototypes, both made decent bikes, but Harley's model, the WLA, the famous WLA, the same bike that Captain America got on in the first Avenger, aka the bike that would become the Liberator. Literally its nickname is the Liberator. This bike, the WLA or the Liberator, eventually won out because it was rugged, simple, and easy to mass produce. It was easy for Harley to pump these bikes out, and whenever soldiers did have an issue with them, they were really easy to work on and get parts easily swapped out and get the bikes up and running again. And that's how Harley scored what was basically a golden ticket, a US military contract at the exact moment they needed it. Keep in mind, this is in the middle of the Great Depression. No one is buying bikes right now. So the civilian market is completely obsolete for Harley. These military contracts are the only bikes that are really being sold right now. So Indian and Harley are really trying to like one up each other to get these military contracts. With Harley's history with the military already and their easily producible bike, it kind of just got the favor over Indian, so US military gravitated towards the Harley Liberator. From 1941 to 1945, Harley-Davidson produced nearly 90,000 WLA motorcycles for the US military. Imagine the Milwaukee factory, where just years earlier they'd been struggling to keep the lights on, now running 24/7, cranking out olive drab Harleys by the tens of thousands. These bikes weren't glamorous. They were nicknamed the Liberator because they were literally built to survive. They had skid plates, blackout lights, leather holsters. They were shipped in crates overseas, dropped in the mud, and kept going. And here's a really interesting part of Harley history right here. There was a program called the Lend-to-Lease program where thousands of Liberator motorcycles didn't just go to American troops. They were shipped to allies, including the Soviet Union. The Red Army literally rode Harleys into battle. It boosted Harley's reputation globally, and suddenly their machines weren't just American icons. They were wartime workforces on an international scale. When we're talking about like the Harley motorcycle also, you would think that the iconic Liberator motorcycle was on the front lines, you know, people riding them in guns blazing on the front lines. That's not necessarily what they were used for. Motorcycles had a very practical use in the military. The front lines still, you know, a car, a Jeep, can carry more people, can carry more load, offers better protection too. So those were the front lines machines. Where motorcycles shined were for military police work, message couriers, and then again, kind of to replace horses going through denser forests or woods or terrain where a Jeep was just hard to get through, and motorcycles were able to move troops very quickly through terrain. So they weren't necessarily on the front lines, guns blazing. So that's how World War II kind of saved Harley's ass in the middle of the Great Depression. They provided Harley guaranteed contracts that would get bikes produced, bikes bought, and kind of floated Harley in the middle of the Great Depression. But where the war really pays off for Harley is when it was over. When the war ended, hundreds of thousands of young American soldiers came home, and many of them had spent years with a Harley between their legs. They associated motorcycles with freedom, adventure, and survival. So when they came home, what did they want? They wanted their own Harley. The same camaraderie we feel today in moto culture, kind of this is where like the start of it was, especially for Harley. A lot of soldiers came back, they just wanted bikes, man, and they were already familiar with Harleys, so they naturally just kind of gravitated back towards getting Harleys. You can basically thank World War II for kickstarting what we now call American motor culture. The GIs formed riding clubs, chopped up old military bikes to make them lighter and faster. And these bikes created the foundation of biker culture in the late 40s and 50s. This is why Harley today feels so closely tied to patriotism. The eagle logos, the stars, the stripes, the whole Harley is as American as cherry pie kind of vibe. It all traces back to the war years. Harley wasn't just selling bikes anymore, they were selling an identity. Harley-Davidson could have gone the way of dozens of early 20th century motorcycle brands that died off during the Depression. Instead, World War II gave them a lifeline, a military contract that kept the factory alive. The war put their bikes on the world stage, and the returning soldiers came home and built a moto culture around them, and that turned Harley into a symbol of American freedom. It wasn't just about motorcycles anymore at this point. It was about what riding one meant. And that's pretty much the story of how World War II kind of saved Harley. Let me know what you guys think of this episode of Moto History. Let me know if you guys are vibing with the concept. If there's something I missed about World War II and its relationship to Harley-Davidson, drop it in the comments, let me know. I really like history, so I'm really excited to start this series and keep it going. Let me know if you guys want to see more Moto History. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.